I am Olivia Sterling, and as of today, I'm 28 years old. Exactly 13 years ago, on a violent, rain-soaked night in October, my own father stared me dead in the eyes and said, "Get out of here. I have no use for a sick daughter like you in my house." I was only 15 at the time, thrust into the freezing downpour with absolutely nowhere to turn. The reason for my exile? A meticulously crafted, intentional lie spun by my younger sister, a lie my parents swallowed without a single ounce of hesitation. Just like that, my existence in that family was terminated. Roughly 3 hours later, the police would contact them with news from the emergency room. I had been struck by a vehicle. When my dad finally walked into that hospital room and laid eyes on the person keeping watch by my bedside, his hands began to tremble uncontrollably. The woman sitting next to me was Dr. Eleanor Smith, a highly esteemed university professor who had discovered me bleeding on the asphalt and saved my life. That stormy evening altered the trajectory of my entire existence. Fast forward to last month, I found myself standing at a podium as the keynote speaker for my sister's college graduation ceremony. My parents were in the audience, completely blind to the fact that I would be there. Before I dive into the sheer shock of what unfolded when they realized who was on stage, I want to ask you to take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, but only if you're truly engaged with this story. I'd also absolutely love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is right now. Leave a comment down below. Alright, let's rewind to the very beginning. I figured out at a very young age that in our household, Madison's tears carried far more weight than my successes. When I was 11 years old, I took home the first place prize at our regional science fair. My project, which focused on water filtration systems, managed to beat out 40 other students. I was practically bursting with pride. I sprinted home, gripping that blue ribbon tightly in my fist, kicked open the front door, and found my mom in the kitchen. "Look, I actually won." I cheered. She offered a warm smile and pulled me into a hug. "That's fantastic, honey." But then Madison trudged in from her dance practice. She was 8, her face flushed red, crying hysterically. I ruined my pirouette. Everyone made fun of me. Instantly, my mom's arms dropped away from me. She crouched down and scooped Madison into a comforting embrace. "Oh, sweetheart. It's all right. You'll nail it next time." I just stood there, awkwardly clutching my ribbon. Not a single person asked to look at it. That became the standard operating procedure. Madison constantly needed validation. Madison was incredibly fragile. Madison required kid gloves. So, I trained myself to celebrate in silence, to minimize my needs, and to shrink myself to fit the space left over. By the time I hit 14, I didn't even bother showing them my report cards. A flawless streak of A's simply couldn't compete with the theatrics of Madison's B-. When I earned a spot at an incredibly competitive summer science camp, I was ecstatic. It was a full-ride scholarship for 2 weeks of environmental science study alongside real-world researchers. My dad briefly glanced up from his screen. "That's nice, Olivia." Predictably, Madison erupted into a sobbing fit. Why does she get to leave? It's completely unfair. My mom gently rubbed Madison's back, then looked at me. "Olivia, maybe you should pass on it this time. Your sister I need you to stay here." Madison chimed in, perfectly completing her sentence. "I never went to that camp. They disguised it under the banner of family unity, telling me it was about being empathetic and being the bigger person. I was conditioned to be invisible, silent, and entirely self-sufficient. But the breaking point was rapidly approaching. I just had no clue it would roll in with a thunderstorm. The deception started with little things. Madison, now 12, would casually take my belongings without asking. Whenever I brought it up, always treading lightly, she would blatantly lie. "I never even saw your sweater." Even when the item was sitting right on her mattress, my mom would just exhale heavily. "Olivia, please don't instigate things." Then, the stakes got higher. $50 vanished from my mom's wallet. Madison claimed she spotted me hovering near the purse that morning. I hadn't even been home. I had gone to school early. My dad summoned me to his home office. "Did you steal cash from your mother?" "No, absolutely not," I replied. Madison claims you did. Madison isn't telling the truth. His jaw clenched tight. Do not point fingers at your sister. But I didn't take it. That is enough. His voice boomed over mine. I am incredibly disappointed in you, Olivia. I really thought you had better character. I was grounded from my phone for an entire month, and the promise that I could finally attend that science camp the following summer was permanently revoked. We just can't trust you with that kind of freedom right now, my mom stated. From her perch on the staircase, Madison watched the whole exchange. When our parents turned their backs, a smug smile crept across her face. That missing $50 was merely a practice round. Madison was figuring out that she possessed a get-out-of-jail-free card for life. The behavior only escalated from there. A shattered decorative vase? Automatically my fault. A bombed exam that Madison blatantly ignored studying for? I clearly hadn't tutored her enough. A nasty rumor floating around the middle school about Madison cheating on a test? I must have been the one to spark it. Eventually, I just gave up trying to defend my own innocence. What was the use? They valued her crocodile tears over my actual reality every single time. By the time I turned 15, I felt like an apparition haunting my own residence. I was physically there, but completely ignored, unless they needed a convenient scapegoat. I began practically living at the local library or staying late at school, doing whatever it took to avoid being home. I continuously reassured myself that I just had to endure it until college. 2 more years. I could survive 2 more years. I was gravely mistaken. It was October of my junior year, and the atmosphere felt incredibly tense all week. There was this guy at my high school named Jake. We shared an AP chemistry class. He was sweet, but absolutely hopeless when it came to balancing chemical equations. He had requested a little tutoring, so I hung back after the bell a few times to walk him through stoichiometry. That was the extent of it, just academic support. But Madison was infatuated with him. It was an intense, all-consuming middle school crush. She would literally alter her walking route just to stroll past my classroom for a glimpse of him. She had even been practicing the signature Madison Sterling Walker in the pages of her diary, which I accidentally saw when I went to retrieve a pen she had stolen. That Tuesday, Jake jogged over to my locker. "Hey, I really appreciate the tutoring yesterday. You're a lifesaver." I gave a polite smile. "No worries at all. Maybe we could hit the books together before the midterm," he suggested. "Yeah, the library is fine," I said. "Awesome," he replied and wandered off. I shut my locker door and caught sight of Madison standing 20 feet down the corridor. She was glaring at me, her face completely drained of color. During dinner that evening, she was eerily mute, just aimlessly stabbing her pasta. My mom kept checking in, asking if she was coming down with something. Madison would just offer a dramatic shrug and remain silent. Looking back, I should have realized that her silence was infinitely more lethal than her crying. On Thursday, my biology class hosted a guest speaker, Dr. Eleanor Smith, a professor from the State University. Her presentation focused heavily on educational equity and systemic barriers. Intrigued, I lingered after the bell to pick her brain. She seemed genuinely taken aback by my questions. "You have a wonderfully curious mind," she noted, sliding her business card across the desk. Never let anyone extinguish that spark. I beamed and expressed my gratitude, completely oblivious to the fact that this woman was about to rescue me from the brink of death. A week later, the severe weather warnings began broadcasting. A massive storm front was rolling in. The whole town was on edge, boarding up and hoarding supplies. Madison was still completely ignoring me. She refused to even make eye contact. I remember foolishly thinking to myself, well, at least I can use the stormy weekend to grind out my homework without any drama. I was completely blind to the trap she was setting. Friday night arrived, and the torrential rain kicked off right around 6 o'clock. Dinner was consumed in suffocating silence. The emergency alerts on my dad's phone wouldn't stop shrieking, high wind advisories, flash flood watches. The anxiety in the room was palpable. Madison poked at her food, and I could sense her gaze burning into my skull. The second I looked up, she'd snap her eyes away. After we ate, I retreated to my bedroom and cracked open my English textbook. Beyond the glass, the gale was intensifying, violently whipping rain against the panes. It was the exact type of weather that makes you deeply thankful for a sturdy roof. Right around 8 o'clock, the wailing started downstairs. It was Madison, dramatic, breathless, chest-heaving sobs. I completely froze, dropping my pencil, straining to listen. I heard my mom's gentle cooing. "Sweetheart, what's going on? Please tell me." The crying only amplified. I sat there, theorizing. Maybe she stubbed her toe? Maybe another failed pop quiz? Then I heard it. "Olivia." My dad's tone was sharp, laced with pure rage. "Get down here right this second." My stomach plummeted into my shoes. I descended the staircase at a glacial pace, every single step feeling like lead. Madison was huddled on the sofa, burying her face into my mom's shoulder while my mom stroked her back. My dad was positioned by the hearth, arms tightly folded, his face flushed with fury. "What's happening?" I questioned cautiously. Madison lifted her head, her eyes puffy and leaking tears. She locked eyes with me, and for a fraction of a second, a fleeting micro-expression, I caught a glimpse of something deeply malicious hiding beneath the sorrow. Then, the mask slipped back on. "Repeat to her what you just told us," my dad commanded, his voice freezing cold. Madison's bottom lip quivered perfectly. "Why do you despise me so much?" "Excuse me?" I took a confused step forward. "I don't despise you." "Then why?" She let out a dramatic hiccup. "Why have you been starting horrible rumors about me all over school?" My brain short-circuited. "What rumors? About me and Jake? About me cheating? About me being a compulsive liar?" The room felt like it was spinning. "Madison, I never, do not lie to her face," my mom interjected softly. "Just don't do it." I had absolutely no clue what web she had spun, but the reveal was imminent, and it would rip my life apart. "I haven't started a single rumor," I insisted, my voice vibrating with anxiety. "I literally have no idea what this is about." Madison shakily produced her smartphone. "Then how do you explain this?" She thrust the screen toward my mom. It was a screenshot of some group text message. The texts attached to my name and my profile picture were saying absolutely vile, degrading things about Madison, words I would never type. "I didn't send those messages," I pleaded. "Someone obviously faked that or used my picture." "Stop," my dad roared, the sound competing with the thunder outside. "Just stop the lying. I'm telling the truth." "And Jake," Madison whimpered softly. "You knew how much I cared about him. But you've been actively throwing yourself at him, trying to humiliate me. He literally asked me to explain chemistry concepts. That is the only thing we talk about." "That's a lie." Madison's volume spiked. "You stay late after the bell with him. You schedule library dates. He even told his buddy he thinks you're gorgeous. You are deliberately trying to steal him away." She pushed herself off the couch. "And then last week you shoved me into the stairwell. Look at this." She aggressively rolled up the sleeve of her shirt, revealing a nasty, dark purple bruise blooming on her forearm. I stared in absolute horror. "I have never laid a finger on you." "She did, Mom." She shoved me. I didn't want to tattle because I figured maybe she was just having a stressful week. My mom immediately stood up, physically barricading Madison from me. "Olivia, this crosses a line. If you are physically assaulting your sister, I'm not." "Then where did that bruise come from?" my dad barked. "I don't know. Maybe she bruised herself on purpose." The accusation hovered in the silent room. Madison's eyes bulged, and a fresh wave of tears cascaded. "You honestly think I would physically injure myself just to frame you?" "Yes," I screamed, entirely unglued and desperate. "Yes, because this is what you do. You lie. You have been making things up about me for years." My dad lunged a step in my direction. "Is that what you think, Olivia? You torture your sister, make her existence a nightmare, and then play the victim." "No. God, no. Please, just look at the facts." "I am done looking at anything." My dad's fist forcefully struck the wooden mantel. "I am completely exhausted by your pathetic excuses." "They aren't excuses. Please, just give me a chance to explain." "There is absolutely nothing left to explain," my mom murmured, her tone dripping with heavy disappointment. "We genuinely believed we raised you to have a better moral compass." Madison buried her face in her palms, playing the role of the battered victim to absolute perfection. I stared at her, truly scrutinized her. And in that split second, she peeked through her fingers. The tears were completely gone. Her gaze was calculated, cold, and victorious. "You're a liar," I rasped, my voice barely audible. "I'm really not," she replied, and her tone didn't waver an inch. "You are. You manufactured this entire scenario." "Olivia," my mom warned. "She's fabricating it." I pivoted wildly to my dad. "Please, you have to see through this. I would never physically attack her. I would never write those texts. She's doing this out of pure jealousy because Jake doesn't notice her. Because that is it." My dad's voice dropped to a terrifyingly flat, dead pitch. "I refuse to hear a single syllable more from you. You are sick. There is something fundamentally wrong with your brain." That specific word felt like a physical punch to the gut. Sick. I am not sick. You are deeply disturbed and you need professional psychiatric intervention. But right this second, he aggressively pointed a finger straight at the front entryway. "Right now, I need you out of my house." The rain was practically taking the roof off outside. The thunder rattled the floorboards. "Dad, there is a literal severe storm out there. I do not care. Where am I even supposed to go? That is no longer my concern." His face contorted with absolute disgust. "Get out of here. I have no use for a sick daughter like you in my house." Those words etched themselves directly into my bones. Sick daughter. As if I were a contagion, a defective product, a monstrous anomaly. I snapped my gaze to my mom, my eyes begging her to intervene, to tell him he was acting insane. She deliberately turned her back, wrapping both arms protectively around Madison. I blindly reached for my jacket on the wall hook. My hands were vibrating with so much adrenaline and terror that I couldn't even manage the zipper. I walked out, and the heavy doors slammed shut behind me. Peering back through the glass pane, I saw Madison watching my exit. She wasn't shedding a single tear. She was grinning. The torrential downpour slammed into me like a brick wall. It was icy, aggressive, and relentless. In a matter of seconds, my clothes were plastered to my skin, completely drenched. I hovered on the front stoop for a minute, desperately clinging to the hope that my dad would swing the door open, admit he lost his temper, and pull me back inside. The door remained a solid block of wood. So, I put one foot in front of the other. I had no destination. I just needed to move away. Away from that toxic structure, away from Madison's psychotic fabrications, away from a set of parents who genuinely viewed me as a diseased outcast. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It buzzed, low battery warning, 8%. I frantically dialed my best friend, Sarah. It rang out. I tried Jessica. Sent straight to her voicemail. It was a Friday evening. Everyone was cozy inside with their families, shielded from the elements. Everyone except me. The gale force winds whipped wet strands of hair directly into my eyeballs. The precipitation was falling in opaque, blinding sheets. Visibility was practically zero past 10 feet. Vehicles zoomed by on the asphalt, blasting me with icy puddle water, but nobody tapped their brakes. I began marching toward the public library, praying I could hunker down under an awning. It was pitch black and completely locked up. The central bus terminal was still 2 grueling miles away. If I could just navigate there, I could hunker down on a plastic bench, thaw out, and formulate a survival plan. I kept trudging. Every single stride required immense effort. My sneakers were waterlogged, emitting a loud, squishing sound with every step. I was shivering so violently that my jaw literally ached from my teeth clattering. Lightning violently fractured the black sky, followed by a deafening boom of thunder. A tiny part of my brain urged me to sprint back, hammer on the door, and grovel for shelter. But the memory of my dad's face, the unadulterated revulsion, I couldn't scrub it from my mind. Sick daughter. Maybe he wasn't wrong. Maybe I was inherently flawed. Why else would my own flesh and blood continuously choose Madison's reality over mine? The bus terminal was a mile out. The weather degraded even further. I honestly didn't register the headlights until they were practically on top of me. I was navigating through a crosswalk. I am positive the pedestrian signal was lit, but the rain was an absolute curtain and the wind was screaming in my ears. The vehicle materialized out of the dark void. Blinding halogen beams, a panicked horn blast, the agonizing screech of rubber locking up on wet tarmac. I attempted to throw my body backward. I simply wasn't quick enough. The kinetic force launched me sideways. I vividly recall the sensation of my hip colliding with the metal hood, and then the devastating impact of the unyielding street. The back of my skull bounced against the pavement. A blinding, white-hot supernova of agony detonated inside my brain. I was paralyzed, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Filthy rainwater flooded into my mouth and flooded my vision. The world was completely sideways. Everything was wrong. I heard a heavy car door violently swing open, followed by boots sprinting and splashing through the deluge. Oh my God. Oh my God, a woman's voice shrieked in absolute terror. Sweetheart, can you hear my voice? I commanded my lips to move. Not a single sound emerged. Do not move an inch. Just stay exactly where you are. I am dialing emergency services. Her hands clamped down on my shoulders, remarkably steady. Please stay awake for me. All right? What is your name? I forced my eyelids to flutter, trying to pull her into focus. Her features were smeared, dark wet hair plastered to her cheeks. She struck me as oddly familiar. Had our paths crossed? Your parents. I choked out, my vocal cords barely producing a raspy wheeze. Your parents? Okay, perfect. What's their cell number? I will contact them right now. They don't. I sputtered, tasting copper on my tongue. They don't want me. Her expression instantly warped. Excuse me, what? They kicked me out. The syllables felt like lead blocks dropping from my mouth. They said I'm sick. They don't want me anymore. She stared down at me, the rain forming a waterfall between us. I noticed a subtle shift in her eyes, a sudden flash of recognition, heavily mixed with pure horror. You are going to survive this, she declared, though her cadence was vibrating with anxiety. I swear to you, you are going to be fine. The wailing of an ambulance siren began piercing through the storm. That woman's rain-soaked face was the final image imprinted on my brain before the darkness swallowed me entirely. I have zero recollection of the ambulance ride. I have no memory of being wheeled into the trauma ward. My initial conscious experience was purely auditory, the rhythmic chirping of heart monitors, the obnoxious hum of overhead fluorescent tubes, the sterile reek of medical-grade alcohol, and a voice. It was the woman who had struck me. She has sustained a severe concussion, and we suspect internal hemorrhaging. You absolutely must admit her for overnight observation. I attempted to pry my eyes open, but they felt like they were superglued shut. My entire skeleton throbbed. I am not leaving, her voice rang out again. It was deeply authoritative now, completely stripped of the panic from the street. I am not leaving this child by herself. Ma'am, are you a blood relative? A nurse asked. I am the driver whose vehicle struck her. And I am planting myself right here until her legal guardians show up. Hours bled away. I floated in the murky waters of semi-consciousness. Different tones of voice drifted in and out of the room. Eventually, new voices entered, voices I recognized immediately. We are Olivia Sterling's parents, my dad announced. He sounded incredibly stressed out. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. It was the woman's voice again. Her tone had shifted to absolute ice. Pure, clinical detachment. I am Dr. Eleanor Smith. A long pause. The gears finally clicked into place. You're a professor over at the State University, my mom stammered. I am the Dean of Graduate Studies, actually. Eleanor's voice could have shattered tempered glass. And I am the person who hit your teenage daughter with my vehicle this evening. We know it was a complete accident, my dad interjected defensively. We aren't holding you liable. She sprinted into a busy intersection in the dead of a flash flood warning. She was drenched to the bone, roaming the streets entirely alone at night. Dr. Smith's volume escalated. She is 15 years old. Why on earth was she wandering out there? Dead silence. Mr. Sterling, I asked you a direct question. We were dealing with a family situation. A behavioral discipline issue. A discipline issue. Dr. Smith parroted the phrase with methodical slowness. Please enlighten me on what specific brand of discipline involves banishing a minor out into a severe weather emergency? We didn't. You're misinterpreting it. Then paint the correct picture for me. Because right before your daughter blacked out on the pavement, she shared something incredibly disturbing. She stated that her parents threw her away. She explicitly said you labeled her as sick. Another heavy silence. She is lying. It was Madison. Her voice was tiny and fragile. Olivia is totally inventing that. She was barely awake. She was absolutely not inventing anything. I heard heavy footsteps approaching my bedside. Dr. Smith stepped away from them. I am going to page a child protective social worker right this second. Now, let's not overreact. That won't be needed. My dad attempted to deploy his dominant tone, completely bombing. We're her biological parents. We will take over her care from here. Sir, with every ounce of respect you deserve, which is very little, you have clearly handled quite enough. This is no longer your jurisdiction. This is a closed family dispute. The precise second you locked a child outside in a hurricane-level storm, it ceased to be a private dispute. I felt Dr. Smith's footsteps return to my side. A warm, fiercely protective hand enveloped mine. I refuse to vacate this room until I am fully assured of her safety. A new, deeper voice cut through the tension. A uniformed officer. Mr. Sterling, I need you to step into the hall to answer some inquiries. We haven't committed a crime, my mom objected, though her vocal cords were trembling violently. Your 15-year-old child was involved in a pedestrian collision at 11 at night during a state of emergency. We need a documented explanation of why she was not safely inside your residence. I fought with everything I had to lift my eyelids. I managed a weak flutter. The room was a soup of blurry figures. I could make out my dad's rigid posture, with Madison hiding behind his back. Dr. Smith immediately caught my movement. She is regaining consciousness. Every single one of you out. Now. She is our flesh and blood, my dad protested. And I am the medical professional monitoring her. Out of my room. Footsteps shuffled backward, the arguing faded, and the heavy door clicked shut. I felt Dr. Smith lean in intimately close. Her grip on my fingers tightened just a fraction. You are entirely safe now, she murmured into my ear. I swear to you, no one is going to hurt you. I desperately wanted to accept her words, but safe was an alien concept. I hadn't experienced safety in my own home in years. I let the exhaustion pull me back under. When I fully awoke 3 days later, my biological family was nowhere to be found. But Dr. Smith was still sitting there. She had honored her vow. She never left me unattended. The traumatic brain injury was no joke. I was confined to that hospital bed for an entire work week. Eleanor visited me every single afternoon. She hauled in stacks of novels, pulled up a chair, and engaged me in deep conversations about university life, scientific theory, and potential futures I had been convinced were out of my reach. My parents managed to drop by exactly once. They dumped a duffel bag of fresh clothes and a folder of missed homework on a chair. They lingered awkwardly near the footboard, looking like total strangers wearing uncomfortable visitor badges. We are just relieved you survived, my mom muttered. My dad gave a stiff nod. You certainly gave everyone a massive scare. Neither of them offered an apology. Neither provided an explanation. Crucially, neither asked when I was coming back to the house. Madison never bothered to show her face. On the 5th morning, a CPS worker named Rita pulled up a chair. She possessed an incredibly warm demeanor and posed her questions with profound gentleness. She asked about the dynamics of my household, my relationship with my sibling, and the exact chronological events of that Friday. I spilled everything. I detailed Madison's relentless manipulation, my parents' eager willingness to criminalize me, and the agonizing sting of the phrase sick daughter. Rita quietly absorbed it all, scribbling furiously on her legal pad. Olivia, I want you to know you have alternative paths. You are not legally obligated to return to that environment. Where on earth would I even go? Dr. Smith tapped lightly on the door frame and stepped inside. She could easily transition into my home, she stated. I stared at her, utterly bewildered. Excuse me, we can arrange a temporary foster placement while we strategize a permanent legal solution. That is, if you are agreeable to it. She glanced at Rita. I have already initiated the background checks and paperwork. Why on earth would you go to those lengths for me? My voice fractured. You don't even know who I am. Eleanor lowered herself onto the edge of my mattress. Because decades ago, a woman did the exact same thing for me. When I was 17, my parents tossed me to the curb. A high school teacher offered me her spare room. It entirely redirected my life. She gently brushed my knuckles. You are an incredibly brilliant girl, Olivia. You harbor a level of potential that most teenagers can't even fathom. Do not ever allow small-minded people to convince you that you are sick. Don't let them blow out your candle. I burst into uncontrollable tears. I simply couldn't hold the dam back anymore. I will completely understand if you choose to return to your parents, she added gently. But if you are hungry for a different reality, I am standing right here. I cemented my choice right there in that sterile room. I chose the different reality. 6 months down the line, I was fundamentally a new human being. I retained my birth name, but everything else was overhauled. Eleanor's residence was a sanctuary of peace, immaculately organized, overflowing with literature, thriving houseplants, and the constant, soothing hum of classical music. She offered me the spare bedroom and gave me carte blanche to paint and decorate it. I enrolled in a different high school and hit the reset button. Not a single soul there knew about the Madison drama, the parental betrayal, or the sick daughter label. I was simply Olivia, highly intelligent, hyper-focused, and finally granted the oxygen to breathe freely. Eleanor, who strictly forbade me from calling her Dr. Smith at home, immersed me in a universe I never knew existed. I tagged along to university auditoriums, sat in on high-level research symposiums, and attended dinner parties where intellectuals debated systemic policy, socioeconomic equity, and progressive change. Education is the ultimate form of liberation, she would constantly remind me. Knowledge is an armor. Nobody can strip it away from you. I launched myself into my academics with a vengeance. Perfect grades were no longer just a metric, they were my undeniable proof. Proof that I wasn't mentally defective, wasn't a broken toy, wasn't a mistake. Eleanor rigorously mentored me on the art of grant writing, the labyrinth of scholarship applications, and the structural safety nets designed to catch kids exactly like me, youth from violently unstable homes who desperately needed a lifeline. You are destined to construct something monumentally important one day, she casually mentioned over a mundane dinner of pasta and greens. A dinner that felt wonderfully normal and overwhelmingly safe. I can practically see it. I occasionally allowed my thoughts to drift toward my biological relatives. I pondered if Madison had ever cracked and confessed. I wondered if my dad ever choked on the memory of his cruel words, or if my mom ever regretted her cowardice. But for the vast majority of the time, they were dead to me. Through the grapevine of old acquaintances, I caught updates. Madison was apparently thriving, maintaining her iron grip on the golden child throne, soaking up all the limelight. My parents had systematically purged every single photograph of me from the walls, scrubbing my existence from the home completely. Fantastic, I thought to myself. Let them delete me. I am busy building an empire. By the dawn of my senior year, my trajectory was locked in. I was going to conquer college, major in educational policy, and engineer a massive system to rescue the teenagers who slip through the massive cracks of institutional failure, the kids whose guardians completely abdicate their duties. I was going to alchemize my trauma into a tangible weapon for good. College passed in an exhausted, caffeinated blur of library all-nighters, thesis drafts, and the slow, grueling process of learning how to rely on others. I secured a massive, full-ride academic scholarship to a highly esteemed university. Eleanor's letter of recommendation was practically a masterpiece. I double-majored in education policy and social justice, picking up a minor in adolescent psychology. I needed to academically deconstruct why certain demographics received endless grace while others were allowed to drown. During my summer breaks, I hustled. I interned at nonprofit advocacy groups, learned the financial mechanics of grant distribution, and figured out exactly how to convert raw empathy into funded programs. I crossed the stage to receive my diploma summa cum laude. Sitting in the audience, Eleanor wept. "I am just so immensely proud of you," she whispered while crushing me in a hug. "So impossibly proud. I was immediately headhunted and hired as a primary research coordinator in a massive university's education department. Ironically, it was Eleanor's home turf. We operated in entirely separate buildings to maintain professional boundaries, but we were fundamentally tethered. When I hit 25, the lightning bolt struck. I pitched a comprehensive scholarship initiative strictly tailored for young adults fleeing abusive or negligent family dynamics. Teenagers who had been discarded, physically locked out, and emotionally starved. Kids who required a financial and structural second chance. I officially branded it the Second Chances Scholarship. It wasn't the most poetic title, but it left zero ambiguity. Eleanor sat with me for weeks, fine-tuning the massive grant proposals. We successfully aggressively lobbied 3 massive philanthropic organizations, secured the bag, and soft-launched the pilot program at a single university. Then we expanded to 2, then to 5. By the time I celebrated my 27th birthday, we had distributed north of $200,000 in tuition assistance. We had directly kept 47 young adults enrolled in their degree programs, kept a roof over their heads, and kept their hope alive. The press eventually caught the scent. Regional newspapers and prestigious educational digests began profiling the initiative. I sat for dozens of interviews, spoke on massive conference panels, but I always kept my personal origin story intentionally blurry. I simply referenced a 15-year-old girl who was informed she had no place in her home. I vehemently refused to drop names. Then came the day my senior colleague, David Brooks, tapped lightly on my office glass. "Olivia, you were on the shortlist to deliver the keynote address at a massive spring graduation." "Oh, wow. Which institution?" I asked. "Riverside State University." My stomach instantly performed a freefall. "That's..." I paused, forcing a lungful of air. "That is my younger sister's college." David blinked rapidly. "I had no idea you even had a sibling." "I don't. Not anymore," I murmured softly. "But yes, she is scheduled to walk that stage this coming spring." David slowly lowered himself into a chair. "Do you want me to formally decline the invitation for you?" I sat there, staring blankly at the polished wood of my desk, my eyes tracing the immaculate stacks of approved scholarship applications. 47 ruined lives put back together. 47 second chances. What is the overarching theme of the ceremony? I finally inquired. Resilience and overcoming educational inequity. The university president, President Walsh, personally demanded your presence. He insisted that your life's work is the absolute embodiment of what the graduating class needs to hear. My life's work. An empire forged directly from the ashes of being deemed a sick daughter. Would I hesitated. Would I retain absolute creative jurisdiction over the manuscript? 100% control. They literally just want your voice on that stage. I visualized Madison lounging in her graduation regalia, flashing that practiced smile, undoubtedly boasting to her peers about her flawless upbringing, her deeply devoted parents, and the perks of being an only child. I visualized my parents sitting proudly in the folding chairs, entirely ignorant, stubbornly convinced that throwing me away 13 years prior was a justified parenting decision. I envisioned myself dominating that stage and laying my history bare, not to exact petty vengeance, but to finalize the narrative. "I need to discuss this with Eleanor," I informed him. That evening, over plates of food, I spilled the details. They are completely unaware of the woman I have become. They have absolutely zero clue that I spearheaded this program. For all I know, they assume I'm deceased or living on the streets. I trailed off. Honestly, I don't care what they assume. Eleanor placed her silverware down softly. "What is your ultimate objective here?" "I want to permanently slam this book shut. Not with a screaming match, but with undeniable facts. And if the unvarnished truth happens to wound them, well, they initiated the bloodshed." I stared directly into her eyes. "I promise I am not doing this to be a vindictive monster. I am doing this because my survival story is important. Proving to them that I succeeded in spite of their attempts to ruin me isn't toxic. It's just accurate." Eleanor extended her arm across the table and wrapped her fingers around mine. "Then you march up there and do it under your own rules, with your chin held high. Introduce them to the powerhouse you are today." I dialed David at 8 a.m. sharp. Inform President Walsh that I enthusiastically accept. I hadn't laid eyes on Madison in over a decade, but the digital age makes it impossible for ghosts to stay completely hidden. Her social media footprint was aggressive. Her senior year was heavily documented through meticulously airbrushed uploads and painfully calculated captions. Lavish brunches, library study dates that were clearly staged photo ops. The quintessential, glossy college fantasy. I honestly cannot believe I'll be an alumni in 2 short months, one caption exclaimed. Another read, beyond blessed for my amazing parents who have held my hand through every single milestone. The tags were nauseating. #blessed, #family first. The comment section was a chorus of praise. You're an icon. So incredibly proud of your journey. Your mom and dad truly raised a queen. I subjected myself to scrolling her grid exactly 1 time out of morbid, clinical fascination. Predictably, there were 0 throwback photos of us. Not a single text reference to a sibling in her massive digital footprint. I was effectively a phantom. One specific photo snared my attention. Madison sitting at a high-end restaurant with Richard and Patricia. Giant, pearly smiles and hoisted champagne flutes. Kicking off the graduation celebrations with the 2 most spectacular humans on Earth. I love you endlessly, Mom and Dad. My dad's hair had heavily frosted over with gray. My mom had developed deep stress lines. Yet, they appeared genuinely overjoyed. I locked my phone screen. Through a few incredibly loose mutual connections from my past life, I gathered intelligence. Madison was hyping up the ceremony hard. Her entire sorority clique was attending. My parents had allegedly rented out a venue for an extravagant post-grad bash. I heard the keynote speaker is supposed to be highly influential. One old acquaintance had posted in an open Facebook thread. Some policy researcher who funds marginalized kids. Could be cool. Madison herself had actually replied to the thread. Ugh, those university speeches are always a snoo fest, but whatever. It's all about my big moment anyway. I actually chuckled at her comment, took a permanent screenshot, and locked it in a folder. It wasn't a revenge trophy, it was a physical reminder that she was walking blindly into a buzzsaw of her own making. I briefly wondered if she would even recognize my face. 13 years is an eternity. I had physically matured, cultivated an entirely new aura, and morphed into a formidable professional. Time would tell. I spent 2 grueling weeks engineering the manuscript. I drafted, deleted, restructured, ruthlessly cut the fat, and rehearsed it out loud to Eleanor over a dozen times. Do not give them the satisfaction of using their names, Eleanor firmly advised. Lay out the blueprint of the events. Allow the audience to draw their own horrific conclusions. I designed the opening to be heavily analytical, shocking statistics on educational disparity, analyzing the exact mechanisms of how vulnerable kids are lost to the streets. Then, a sharp pivot into the painfully personal. At the age of 15, I was explicitly told I was worthless, that I possessed a defective brain, and that I was too toxic to be kept inside my own home. I ran the drills in front of my bathroom mirror, forcing my facial muscles to remain perfectly serene, clinical, and unshakable. But an outsider looked at me and saw brilliance instead of a burden. She granted me a second lease on life. And that singular act rewrote my destiny. 0 waterworks, 0 temper tantrums. Just the cold, hard, undisputed facts. David handled all the logistical nightmares. VIP parking, backstage lanyards, and confirming my exact title in the ceremonial pamphlets, Olivia Sterling, Executive Director, Second Chances Scholarship Foundation. The night preceding the event, sleep was a mathematical impossibility. I lay rigid under my duvet, analyzing the ceiling texture, cycling through Madison's smirking face, my dad's echoing voice barking, sick daughter, my mom's cowardly back turn. Was I genuinely doing this from a place of healing? Eleanor lightly tapped my bedroom door and entered holding a steaming mug of chamomile. She took a seat at the foot of my mattress, a ritual we'd performed hundreds of times over the years. Battling the internal doubts, she asked softly, "Just noisy thoughts. You are no longer the frightened little girl they left in the rain, Olivia. You are the architect of your own empire now. Anchor yourself to that truth tomorrow." I took a slow sip of the honeyed tea. Will you be in the crowd? Front row, dead center. As always. The morning sun crested far too rapidly. I dressed with meticulous precision. A sharply tailored navy business suit. It projected absolute authority without feeling pretentious. Around my neck, I clasped Eleanor's grandmother's antique pearl strand. She had absolutely insisted I wear them as armor. Staring into my vanity mirror, the reflection staring back was imposing, polished, and terrifyingly successful. I bore absolutely zero resemblance to the shivering outcast who had been labeled a mental defect. I was fully loaded and ready to fire. The university grounds were stunningly picturesque. Ancient brick architecture, sprawling emerald quads. Thousands of students draped in synthetic robes swarmed the pathways, posing for endless portraits with tearful relatives. The atmosphere was practically vibrating with youthful optimism. I pulled in early and was immediately escorted to President Walsh's private suite. He was overly enthusiastic and incredibly welcoming. Ms. Sterling, the university is profoundly honored by your attendance. Your philanthropic impact is nothing short of legendary. I deeply appreciate the invitation, sir. I guarantee the graduating class will leave here today profoundly inspired. David physically escorted me down into the labyrinth beneath the massive auditorium. The backstage area was a whirlwind of controlled panic. Technicians frantically testing audio feedback, deans wrestling with their ceremonial hoods, graduates peeking through the heavy velvet drapes to spot their families. I snagged a glossy pamphlet from a folding table and scanned the alphabetical index. There it was. Row 3, seat 12. Madison Sterling, Bachelor of Arts in Communications. My pulse hammered violently against my sternum. You holding up okay? David whispered. Yes, I replied, sharply creasing the pamphlet in half. Just deeply ready. Eleanor slipped backstage to find me. She was stunning in a deep emerald dress, radiating maternal pride. She pulled me into a rib-crushing hug. You are completely prepared for this. I know I am. Remember the rules. Spine straight, articulate the truth. This isn't a hit job, it's a documentary. I flashed a genuine smile. Head high, truth clear. No revenge, just honesty. She placed a gentle kiss on my cheekbone and vanished to claim her VIP seat. The cavernous auditorium was rapidly reaching capacity. A low, thunderous hum of thousands of conversations echoed off the high ceilings. Legions of proud grandparents, exhausted parents, and hyped-up friends. Somewhere buried within that massive ocean of humanity, my biological parents were getting comfortable, most likely snagging prime sight lines to document Madison's crowning achievement. They were completely blind to the identity of the incoming speaker. David had triple-checked the pamphlets. My full name was indeed printed, but it was buried deep beneath paragraphs of administrative text. People rarely read the speaker biographies until the person is physically walking to the microphone. Their ignorance was about to expire. President Walsh lightly tapped my shoulder blade. We go live in 5 minutes. You are up immediately following my opening statements. I offered a sharp nod, inhaled deeply, and ran a smoothing hand down my blazer. Standing in the darkened wings, I stared out at the fiercely illuminated stage, the grand wooden podium, the sleek microphone, and the vast expanse of unaware faces. The clock had struck 0. Wait, before I narrate exactly how the explosion happened when I stepped into the spotlights, I need to pause and ask you something. Have you ever been trapped in a scenario where your own blood relatives completely villainized you, but you ultimately proved every single one of them dead wrong? Drop a simple yes or no in the comments right now. And if you are deeply invested in this saga, please smash that like button. It seriously pushes the algorithm to share this message with people who might desperately need to hear it today. Okay, let's get back to the auditorium. This is the exact moment the Earth shifted on its axis. President Walsh confidently strode to the center stage podium. A hush swept over the thousands of attendees. Welcome graduates, devoted families, and distinguished faculty. Today, we gather to acknowledge academic triumph, unyielding resilience, and the limitless ceiling of our student body. Polite applause echoed. Our hand-selected keynote speaker is the living, breathing embodiment of these exact virtues. She has sacrificed her early career to guarantee that every single marginalized youth, regardless of their horrific background circumstances, is granted a seat at the table. Please put your hands together for the Executive Director of the Second Chances Scholarship Foundation, Ms. Olivia Sterling. A wave of respectful, standard-issue applause rolled through the room. I stepped out of the shadows and directly into the blinding stage lights. The platform felt as massive as an aircraft carrier. The wooden podium anchored the center. Beyond the VIP seating, the crowd was a pixelated blur of identical black hats and gowns. I approached the microphone with calculated, predatory slowness. Every click of my heels echoed through the PA system. I was the picture of unbothered confidence. And then, my eyes locked onto them. Row 3. Madison in her pristine gown, draped in gold honor cords. She was mid-clap, a wide smile plastered on her face, actively twisting her torso to gossip with a classmate beside her. Then, she rotated her head toward the stage. She saw my face. Her hands paralyzed in midair. The smile instantly evaporated into horror. Absolute, unadulterated shock hijacked her features. Her jaw literally dropped open, but her vocal cords paralyzed. 5 rows behind her, dead center. Mom and Dad. They were still politely clapping, their eyes lazily scanning the stage, not quite processing the visual data yet. Just blindly applauding a successful stranger. I arrived at the podium, gripped the edges, leaned into the microphone, and allowed my gaze to slowly sweep the room. Madison had turned the color of a fresh bedsheet. The girl next to her elbowed her ribs. "Hey, you good?" Eleanor was seated prominently in the front row, directly to my right. She offered me one single, stoic nod. I squeezed the wood. "Good morning, everyone." And a profound thank you to President Walsh for that incredibly flattering introduction. My voice projected flawlessly, crisp, authoritative, dominating the massive space. Down in row 8, my dad's head violently snapped up. I watched his spine lock rigid as he leaned drastically forward, his eyes narrowing to slits as his brain scrambled to identify the voice haunting the speakers. My mom's hand shot directly to her throat. I smiled, a perfectly engineered, corporate smile. "It is a massive privilege to stand before you today. This morning, I want to dissect the concept of resilience. I want to talk about what actually happens when you are stripped of absolutely everything you love, only to discover your true self in the rubble." The entire room had gone dead silent, fully captivated. Allow me to walk you through the true story of a 15-year-old girl. I modulated my tone to remain conversational, yet piercing. She was explicitly informed by the people supposed to protect her that she was an unwanted burden. She was told her brain was fundamentally defective. She was told she was too damaged to be kept. My mom's hand blindly reached out and locked onto my dad's bicep with a death grip. I could see the panic radiating off them from 50 feet away. One evening, amidst a catastrophic weather emergency, she was physically thrown out of her own house. She was instructed to leave the premises and bluntly told that her existence was no longer desired. A wave of uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the seated parents. People shifted awkwardly. She navigated that freezing storm alone for hours. No cellular battery, zero currency, absolutely nowhere to seek refuge. Eventually, she was violently struck by a speeding vehicle. She very nearly died on the asphalt. Madison had gone catatonic. She was sitting completely frozen, her face drained of all humanity. But incredibly, a stranger hit the brakes. A stranger intervened. A stranger looked at a bleeding teenager and saw immense potential where her blood relatives only saw a massive inconvenience. Down in the front row, Eleanor's eyes were practically glowing with fierce pride. That complete stranger legally adopted her. She became her mentor, her champion, and her true mother in every single capacity that defines the word. I intentionally paused, allowing the dead silence to amplify the tension. That discarded 15-year-old girl was me. The collective gasp in the auditorium was audible. You could have heard a feather hit the carpet. My dad half stood out of his folding chair, his face a mask of total panic. My mom desperately yanked him back down by his jacket tail. Both of them sat there completely paralyzed, their mouths hanging wide open. Down in row 3, Madison looked like she was actively praying for the floorboards to swallow her whole. The graduates surrounding her began whispering frantically, pointing fingers up at the stage and down at her. Her sorority sisters looked deeply disturbed. I am breathing the air in this room today purely because Dr. Eleanor Smith, I dramatically extended an open palm toward Eleanor, refused to abandon me when my biological creators did. She educated me on the fact that rejection does not signify the end of your book. It is merely the opening of a new chapter. The whispers in the crowd were escalating into a low roar. The Second Chances Scholarship Foundation was birthed directly from that trauma. It was explicitly designed to catch the youth who have been brutally informed they are inadequate. The kids who have been casually dismissed, legally abandoned, and thrown to the wolves. I locked my eyes directly onto Madison's terrified face. I did not blink. Because suffering rejection by toxic people does not define your trajectory. What you choose to build in the aftermath of that rejection is what defines you. As of this morning, our foundation has fully funded the survival of 47 brilliant minds. My voice never shook. It was a laser beam. Students exactly like the broken girl I used to be. Somewhere in the back, a mother aggressively whispered, "Oh my God, is that girl in the third row her actual sister?" I plowed forward, a pillar of professional grace. I absorbed a critical lesson during those brutal years of recovery. Family is absolutely not a biological mandate. More often than not, true family is a conscious choice. Sometimes, your real family consists entirely of the individuals who actively run toward you when your blood relatives are busy sprinting away. Eleanor reached up and delicately dabbed a tear from her cheek, beaming at me. I learned that you do not require a village of people to validate you. You literally only need one single human being. One person willing to look past the surface noise, look past the false accusations, and look past the malicious lies. Madison's stoic mask finally shattered. Her face crumpled inward, she dropped her chin to her chest, and her shoulders began to heave with silent sobs. The whispering among her peers had ceased. They were now openly glaring at her, rapidly connecting the dots of my story to the girl sitting next to them. And ultimately, I learned, my hands clamped down hard on the podium, that genuine success is not fueled by a desperate need to prove your abusers wrong. True success is about erecting something beautiful and meaningful entirely in spite of them. My dad's hands were shaking so violently he had to bury his face in his palms. He looked like a trapped animal desperate for an exit route. My mom was weeping openly, dark streaks of mascara ruining her makeup. So, to the graduating class of Riverside State University, I leave you with this final absolute truth. Your inherent value is not calculated by the people who choose to stick around. Your value is determined by how massively you grow after the cowards walk away. I paused, letting the finality of the statement detonate over the crowd. You will inevitably face brutal rejection, shattering disappointment, and people who completely underestimate your power. That is a statistical guarantee. I swept my gaze over the sea of anxious, hopeful 20-somethings. But you alone possess the authority to dictate the next move. You alone hold the pen to write who you become. The standing ovation started as a slow ripple in the back and rapidly exploded into a tidal wave. Thousands of students leapt to their feet, followed by the faculty, followed by the families. The applause was deafening, but not everyone stood. My dad remained glued to his chair, looking physically ill. My mom mechanically stood up, clapping with zero enthusiasm, openly bawling. Madison remained entirely seated, a frozen statue, staring intensely at her own lap. I took 2 steps back from the microphone. President Walsh was practically glowing with excitement. "Phenomenal, Miss Sterling." That was earth-shattering. I bypassed him, walked off the stage, vanished into the velvet wings, and let out a massive, purging exhale. The machinery of the ceremony kicked back into gear. President Walsh reclaimed the mic and initiated the grueling process of reading off hundreds of names. I hovered backstage, utilizing a small gap in the curtains to monitor the fallout. The entire vibe of the arena had been poisoned. As students crossed the platform to snatch their degrees, the applause was highly distracted. Thousands of people were too busy whispering, pointing, and aggressively texting to care about the diplomas. Madison Sterling. Bachelor of Arts, Communications. Madison rigidly stood up and marched toward the stage stairs. Her signature smile was a grotesque, forced grimace. Her fingers visibly trembled as the dean handed her the leather folder. The resulting applause was painfully thin and highly scattered. A handful of die-hard friends clapped aggressively, but the vast majority of her section sat with their arms folded, tracking her every move with deep suspicion. She practically sprinted off the opposite side of the stage and melted back into the mob of graduates. I watched her inner circle swarm her, demanding answers. I saw Madison violently shaking her head, attempting to spin a defense and failing miserably. Further back, my mom and dad sat like gargoyles, rigid, silent, staring straight ahead at nothing. Once the final name was called, President Walsh returned to conclude the event. I present to you the class of 2026. Hats were launched into the rafters. The crowd erupted into chaos as the barricades fell and families rushed the floor. I completely bypassed the madness, slipping out an emergency exit. I located Eleanor waiting in the VIP reception lobby. "You completely nailed it," she declared, pulling me into a fierce embrace. "I actually did." "What is the emotional read?" she asked, studying my face. I took a second to genuinely evaluate my internal state. Liberated. David suddenly materialized, looking incredibly flustered. "Olivia," that speech was. I am speechless. It was raw. He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "I had no clue about your history. Are you mentally okay right now?" "I am perfectly fine." "Well, they're demanding an audience." "Who is?" "Your biological parents. They're sequestered by the south entrance pillars. They're begging to speak with you." My stomach tied itself into a brief knot. "Am I obligated to do this?" David violently shook his head. "Zero obligation. I can literally wave campus security over right now and have them trespassed." "No," I squared my shoulders, instantly regaining my armor. "I will address them entirely on my own terms. I am allocating exactly 5 minutes. That is the cap." Eleanor stepped up, her presence a silent threat. "I am flanking you." I navigated the crowded lobby toward the south exit, walking directly toward the ghosts of my past. They were huddled near a concrete column. My dad's complexion was a ghastly shade of gray. My mom looked like she had aged a decade, her face streaked with ruined cosmetics. Madison was lurking a few feet behind them, her eyes bloodshot and swollen. I abruptly halted my advance, leaving exactly 3 feet of cold, professional distance between us. "You requested a conversation?" I prompted. My dad's jaw opened, then snapped shut. "Olivia, we were entirely unaware you were going to be the speaker today. I am highly confident you were. You look." My mom's voice violently cracked in half. "You look incredibly healthy." "I am incredibly healthy. Dr. Smith guaranteed that outcome." Eleanor casually stepped out from my shadow, positioning herself as a visible shield. My dad's eyes darted nervously toward her, then firmly glued themselves to the floor tile. "We owe you a massive apology." "You owe me considerably more than a verbal apology," I replied, my tone devoid of anger, just an icy statement of fact. "But I suppose an apology is a baseline starting point. We committed a horrific error," my mom wept. "A catastrophic failure in judgment. We should have evaluated the facts. You should have acted like parents and protected your child. That is the bare minimum job description." I intentionally kept my arms relaxed by my sides. I refused to cross them. I refused to look defensive or intimidated. Instead, you eagerly digested Madison's fabricated reality over my actual truth. You labeled me a psychiatric case. You tossed me onto the street in the middle of a natural disaster. Madison physically recoiled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "We were entirely in the wrong," my dad croaked, his voice shattering. I was entirely in the wrong. I have carried the agonizing regret of that specific night every single morning for 13 years. "Excellent," I shot back. The word hovered in the air like a blade. "Can we please sit down and discuss this?" my mom pleaded, her hands reaching out into the empty space. "Can we handle this privately as a family?" "We are absolutely not a family." I delivered the line with a soft, clinical detachment. It wasn't meant to cause pain, it was just a geographical fact. You successfully terminated that contract 13 years ago. But we can repair the damage, my dad begged, his eyes wide and frantic. We are desperate to repair it. Please, just give us. There is absolutely nothing left to repair. You executed your choice. I executed mine. This transaction is permanently closed. Olivia. It was Madison. Her voice was barely a pathetic squeak. I am profoundly sorry. I was only 12 years old. I was an idiot. I had no idea the consequences. You were absolutely old enough to comprehend the weapon you were wielding. Suddenly, David jogged up, clutching a thick leather binder. Olivia, apologies for interrupting. These are the finalized scholarship disbursement files for the autumn semester. President Walsh requested you take personal custody of them before departing campus. He extended the binder. The thick, embossed university seal was stamped on the cover, right above my heavily bolded title, containing the profiles of the lives I was actively saving. My dad's eyes locked onto the leather. You single-handedly engineered all of this? Yes, despite your absolute worst efforts. My mom tentatively reached out and touched the edge of the binder. She flipped it open. Her face contorted in agony as she absorbed the data. 200 active applicants? 47 fully funded. And we are aggressively scaling the operation. You are an executive director? Senior executive director. They promoted me 30 days ago. I smoothly yanked the binder out of her hands. I dictate policy for 5 separate institutions. We have successfully deployed over $200,000 to rescue students who survived domestic nightmare scenarios. President Walsh unexpectedly rounded the corner, completely oblivious to the radioactive tension. Miss Sterling, I must tell you again, that was arguably the most profound address this university has hosted in a decade. The student body is completely electrified. I appreciate the kind words, President Walsh. He pivoted toward my parents with a beaming smile. Are you folks Miss Sterling's relatives? Good heavens, you must be bursting with pride. Dead silence. Oh, they absolutely are, Eleanor chimed in with a sickly sweet, venomous smile. Isn't that correct, Mr. Sterling? My dad's jaw muscles violently twitched. Yes, immensely proud. Walsh nodded happily. Miss Sterling is an absolute titan in our network. Her foundation has quite literally pulled teenagers back from the brink of death. He vigorously shook my hand and strolled away. My dad stared at me. He looked at my suit, my posture, my absolute dominance of the space. We genuinely had no clue. You never bothered to inquire. I kept my volume low, utterly devoid of rage, merely exhausted by their presence. You actively deleted me from the archives. You pretended I was never born. Why would you possess any clues? I desperately tried to track you down, my mom whispered frantically. After they discharged you from the ward, you completely vanished. I legally altered my documentation. I specifically designed it to be a dead end. I locked my eyes directly onto hers. I desperately required you to fail at finding me. I required a sterile environment to properly heal. And did you? My dad choked out. Did you heal? Yes, completely without your assistance. Just then, a trio of Madison's sorority sisters marched over. They looked incredibly hostile. Madison, the lead girl, barked, ignoring the parents entirely. Is that story factual? Is she legitimately your biological sister? Madison gave a pathetic, microscopic nod, entirely incapable of forming words. You repeatedly swore to us you were an only child. I know. I just felt, you literally told the entire pledge class your older sister was dead. The second girl's voice was dripping with absolute disgust. Last spring, you sat in my dorm and cried, claiming she died in a horrific car wreck when you were in middle school. My eyebrows shot toward the ceiling. You actually killed me off to your friends? Madison's face flushed a violent crimson. I didn't mean it like that. It was just significantly easier than trying to explain the reality. Explaining what reality? The lead girl exploded. The reality that your parents banished her to the streets? The reality that you're a sociopathic liar. It wasn't black and white like that. Then paint it in color for us. The third girl completely ignored Madison and turned to me. I am incredibly sorry. I am so disgusted that you had to survive these people. I appreciate that, I responded softly. The three girls spun on their heels and marched away in unison. Madison stood entirely isolated, watching her social empire instantly vaporize. Madison, my mom began, reaching out. Shut up. Madison snapped, venom lacing her words. Just shut your mouth. She rotated back to me, her eyes manic. I debated confessing the truth a million times. I desperately wanted to clear the air, but I was terrified. Terrified of what exactly? That society would utterly despise me. That I would be a total pariah. She aggressively wiped her nose. And it turns out they were totally right. I absolutely deserve this. Madison, I took a half step forward, closing the distance slightly. I do not despise you. I have fully forgiven your actions, but I did it strictly to secure my own mental sanctuary, not to absolve you of your guilt. However, I have zero desire to forge a relationship with you. I demand you respect that boundary. Can we not just try to know? My answer was a solid brick wall. You actively executed choices for 13 consecutive years. You consciously elected to maintain the illusion and keep me buried. That ceases to be childhood ignorance. That is the definition of your adult character. Madison broke down into hysterical, ugly sobbing. My mom desperately pulled her into a hug. I pivoted to Eleanor. Are we ready to depart? Absolutely. She firmly linked her arm through mine. Let us go home. We turned our backs and walked toward the exit doors. We never once looked over our shoulders. As the glass doors slid open, I could hear Madison's wails echoing in the lobby, closely followed by my dad pathetically calling out my name. It was a weak, hollow sound. I just kept walking into the sunlight. Okay, I need to hit the pause button right here for just a second. That exact moment, standing firmly on the tile, watching Madison finally comprehend that she couldn't manipulate her way out of the consequences, was a reckoning 13 years in the making. If you have ever been forced to construct impenetrable boundaries to keep toxic blood relatives out of your life, drop a comment down below. Boundaries are critical for survival. And if my journey is striking a chord with you, please hit that subscribe button. I continually share these raw experiences because I know for a fact someone out there is currently sitting in the dark, needing to hear it. Now, let me walk you through the chaos of the subsequent weeks. The Monday following the graduation, my smartphone essentially turned into a vibrating brick. My voicemail inbox was jammed with my dad's pleas. Olivia, please return my call. We desperately need to have a dialogue. I am so incredibly sorry. We are both dying of guilt. Please, just pick up. My email inbox was flooded by my mom. Massive, disorganized paragraphs overflowing with pathetic justifications and hollow apologies. We were suffocating under so much financial and marital stress. Madison was navigating a deeply troubling developmental phase. We were entirely blind to the psychological damage we were inflicting. I completely ignored all of it. I didn't send a single reply. I buried myself in my foundation work. The incoming volume of scholarship applications was skyrocketing because the graduation ceremony had gone completely viral. Not the entire Tower event, just a clean recording of my specific keynote. Some tech-savvy student had uploaded it to TikTok and Twitter. It quickly hit 50,000 views, then effortlessly breached 100,000. The comment sections were absolute goldmines of validation. This woman is an absolute powerhouse. Family is absolutely not defined by DNA. It's defined by whoever actually shows up. One user wrote, "I am actively sobbing." This is the exact message I desperately needed today. But naturally, the internet sleuths were hungry for drama. Can anybody verify if this is a true story? Which college is this? We need an immediate update on the evil sister. I ignored the digital circus and stayed locked onto my mission. Then, a bizarre email hit my inbox. It was dispatched by one of Madison's former sorority sisters. The subject line simply read, "You deserve to see this." Attached to the email was a massive file of high-res screenshots from various private group chats. Madison's entire social circle was brutally dissecting her and aggressively cutting ties. One message highlighted in red read, "I legitimately cannot fathom that she lied to our faces about her own sister being dead. That is legitimately sociopathic behavior." Another red. I am officially revoking her invitation to my bridal party. I absolutely refuse to invite that level of toxicity into my life. Madison's painstakingly curated, flawlessly filtered social universe was actively burning to the ground. A microscopic fraction of my brain almost felt a twinge of pity for her. But the overwhelming majority of my brain felt absolutely nothing but a cold, satisfying wave of justice. Eleanor and I sat down for our usual dinner that evening. The atmosphere was incredibly quiet and deeply comfortable. "How are your internal systems processing the fallout?" she gently probed. "I honestly don't even know." I paused, hunting for the exact vocabulary. "I feel completely unchained. It feels exactly like I finally set down a massive boulder that I was entirely unaware I was hauling around." "You operated with immense dignity, Olivia. You controlled the narrative flawlessly." She paused, swirling her wine. "They are actively begging for a reconciliation. Is that something you want?" I actually chewed on the concept for a solid minute. "No, I am entirely certain I do not." She offered a warm nod and gently squeezed my knuckles. "That is a perfectly valid conclusion. You possess the absolute right to keep walking away." A fortnight later, the ultimate violation occurred. My dad physically ambushed my corporate office. The intercom on my desk buzzed violently. "Olivia, I have a Mr. Sterling hovering at the reception desk. He doesn't hold an appointment, but he is aggressively claiming to be your biological father." My stomach muscles instantly contracted. "Give me exactly 5 minutes to clear my desk, then allow him entry." I snapped my laptop shut, meticulously aligned my pens, and took a deep, centering breath. The door clicked open and my dad shuffled in. He looked completely defeated, aged a full 10 years, his hair entirely silver, deep ravines carved around his eyes, his posture entirely collapsed. "I deeply appreciate you allowing me into your office," he murmured. "I am scheduled for a board meeting in exactly 20 minutes, I stated coldly. "I completely understand." He awkwardly lowered himself into the leather chair across from me, his demeanor resembling a terrified applicant at a job interview. "Olivia, I am compelled to speak this out loud. We were disastrously wrong. I was a monster. The actions I took, the horrific slurs I threw at you, they are fundamentally unforgivable." "I completely agree. They are unforgivable." Madison finally cracked and fed us the absolute truth, he continued, his voice wavering. "Late last week, she suffered a complete mental breakdown and confessed to every single detail. The elaborate lies, the psychological manipulation, the fake bruise, everything. Well, she is exactly 13 years late to the party. I am fully aware. I know a confession doesn't magically erase the trauma." His hands were actively trembling. He desperately locked his fingers together. "But you absolutely must understand my reality. We have been suffocating under this agonizing guilt. Every single morning of my life, I am forced to walk past your completely empty bedroom. The bedroom where we aggressively tore down all your photos. And I am forced to acknowledge that we violently annihilated a bond that we can literally never reconstruct. Your assessment is highly accurate. You cannot reconstruct it. Are you capable of forgiving us?" he pleaded, tears welling up. I slowly leaned back against my ergonomic chair and evaluated him like a case study. "Dad, the concept of forgiveness isn't the actual roadblock here. The roadblock is the concept of trust. Trust is completely pulverized. It is dust. You enthusiastically chose to validate Madison's absurd, theatrical lies over my desperate, factual truth. You labeled me a sick daughter. You forcefully ejected me into a lethal storm. I know I did. No, you absolutely do not know." My voice remained chillingly calm, hovering just above a whisper. "You have zero concept of what it physically and mentally feels like to be 15 years old, entirely homeless and freezing to death in a flash flood. You have zero concept of the psychological terror of being explicitly told by your primary male protector that your brain is too damaged to be worthy of love. You will never, ever understand that reality." Tears actively spilled down his weathered cheeks. "What action can I possibly take? Please, mandate something for me to do." "Absolutely nothing. There is no action protocol. Your window of opportunity expired over a decade ago. 72 hours after he vacated my office, a lengthy email populated my inbox. Subject line, "I am so sorry." The sender was Madison. My index finger hovered directly over the delete icon for a solid 10 seconds, but my clinical curiosity ultimately hijacked my hand. Olivia, I am fully aware that my name is the absolute last thing you ever want to see pop up on your screen. I am fully aware that I have forfeited any right to your time. But I am desperate to put this in writing. I was violently, toxically jealous of you. You were effortlessly brilliant and wildly capable, and society gravitated toward you without you even trying. I was forced to perform monkey tricks for every microscopic drop of validation, and it was never sufficient. You were fundamentally superior. When Jake actively pursued you instead of me, my brain snapped. I systematically engineered the entire sabotage. The fake text logs, the self-inflicted bruise on my arm, all of it. I gambled that mom and dad would automatically side with me, because they always did. I never actually anticipated the situation going nuclear. I never genuinely believed dad would physically throw you out into a hurricane. When I watched you trudging down the driveway into the freezing rain, I wanted to vomit. But I was entirely too cowardly and too arrogant to confess and reverse the damage. I have squandered 13 years lying to my peers, and worse, lying to my own reflection. I fabricated the narrative that you died in a crash because that was infinitely easier than publicly admitting I was a monster. I completely decimated your teenage years. I am painfully aware of that. And in the process, I completely decimated my own future. I possess 0 authentic relationships now. Nobody in my circle trusts me. I actually had a corporate job offer rescinded yesterday because an attendee at graduation contacted their HR department and fully summarized the reality of my family dynamics. I am absolutely not requesting your forgiveness. I am well aware I don't qualify for it. I simply needed you to read the words. I am so sorry. I am so incredibly, deeply sorry. Madison. I read the entire manuscript twice, archived it in a folder, and completely ignored it. 4 days elapsed, and she fired off a second email, then a third. Each subsequent message grew increasingly frantic and emotionally unhinged. Following her 5th desperate attempt, I finally typed out a response. It was brief and aggressively final. Madison, I can logically acknowledge that your initial actions were born of adolescent immaturity. However, you possessed 13 consecutive years to rectify the situation. You actively, continuously elected to ensure my existence remained erased. I have internally forgiven you strictly to preserve my own emotional equilibrium, but I absolutely do not desire any form of contact moving forward. I expect you to respect this boundary permanently. She never sent another email. Meanwhile, my viral speech generated a massive snowball effect. A prominent regional news broadcast contacted my office, requesting a primetime interview regarding the scholarship initiative. I approved the request under one strict condition. The journalistic focus had to remain entirely on the marginalized students, completely sidestepping my personal family drama. The resulting segment aired under the banner, Local Policy Researchers' Second Chances Program Pulls At-Risk Youth from the Brink. The network interviewed 3 of my active scholarship recipients. One young woman stared dead into the camera lens and stated, "This specific initiative literally prevented my death." I was weeks away from dropping out and becoming a statistic. Ms. Sterling and her massive team injected hope back into my veins. Overnight, our application volume tripled. Institutional funding requests flooded our servers. 3 additional major universities actively aggressively petitioned to adopt our financial model. Elite educational digests requested I author peer-reviewed articles detailing my administrative methodology. The organizers of a massive, nationwide educational conference formally invited me to be a panelist on the topic of erasing the equity gap in higher education. David casually leaned against my office doorframe one afternoon. "You are legitimately a celebrity in this sector now. How is the ego handling it?" "It feels surreal," I admitted. "I honestly just wanted to write a few checks to save some kids." "You are accomplishing significantly more than writing checks. You are actively dismantling corrupt systems." A week later, The State Board of Education formally mailed me an embossed commendation, officially recognizing my outstanding and unprecedented contributions to systemic educational equity. And through all the blinding success, I quietly monitored the ripple effects of my past. Madison's once boisterous social media accounts went entirely silent. Her profile pictures vanished, and eventually, the accounts were locked down privately. My dad fired off one ultimate, pathetic email: "We are incredibly proud of the empire you built, even though we acknowledge we lost the right to claim you." I sent it straight to the trash bin without a reply. My mom attempted to dial my cell exactly one time. I let it ring into the void. Random family acquaintances from my teenage years suddenly tried aggressively connecting with me on LinkedIn, sending painfully awkward direct messages. "Just read about your massive success." Utterly mind-blowing. "We should absolutely grab coffee and catch up." I politely utilized the decline button on every single one. Simultaneously, Eleanor received her own massive victory. She was selected as a primary keynote speaker for a legendary academic conference out of state. "You are coming with me," she demanded playfully. As my highly esteemed guest and professional colleague, I wouldn't miss it for the world, I smiled. We boarded a flight to Chicago, co-presented our individual research, shacked up in a gorgeous downtown hotel, and spent hours discussing absolutely everything under the sun, except my biological relatives. "You have engineered an incredibly beautiful existence," Eleanor commented over a steak dinner. "You should be immensely proud of the architecture." "I am only here because of your foundation." "Absolutely not," she vigorously shook her head. "Do not steal your own credit. I merely unlocked the front door for you. You walked through it and built the house." Exactly 1 year following Madison's disastrous graduation, my daily reality was entirely unrecognizable. The Second Chances Scholarship was now actively operating across 10 different university campuses. We had successfully retained 83 at-risk students, keeping them enrolled, keeping them out of danger, and keeping them fiercely optimistic. I received a massive promotion to Senior Executive Director, complete with a sprawling corner office, a substantial salary bump, and industry-wide respect from academics whose names I used to highlight in my college textbooks. I even dipped my toes back into the dating pool, spending time with a genuinely compassionate guy named Marcus, who specialized in public policy. The romance eventually fizzled out, but the breakup was completely mutual and highly amicable. It was a beautiful lesson that not every relationship ending requires horrific trauma. When Eleanor hit her 60th birthday, we threw an absolute rager of a party. The venue was packed with fellow academics, lifelong friends, and legions of former students she had personally mentored over the decades. It was a room entirely populated by people who deeply loved her, who actively chose her, and who had collaboratively built a chosen family around her. I stood up, raised a champagne flute, and delivered a toast to the incredible woman who permanently proved to me that family is constructed, not genetically inherited. "Thank you for deciding to choose me," I told her in front of the crowd. She openly wept tears of absolute joy. I do occasionally allow my thoughts to drift toward my biological relatives. It's not a frequent occurrence, and it's completely stripped of any lingering pain. Just fleeting, clinical curiosities wondering what state they're in. Wondering if Madison ever sought serious psychological counseling. Wondering if my dad continues to draft emails he knows I will never acknowledge. They actually managed to mail me a generic Christmas card last winter. There was zero return address printed on the envelope, just 3 scribbled signatures on the inside: Richard, Patricia, Madison. There was absolutely zero personalized message and zero demand for an explanation. I casually tossed it into a junk drawer. I didn't aggressively shred it, nor did I send a card back. I simply let it exist in the dark. Recently, I delivered another commencement speech. It was a completely different campus, with a completely different graduating class, but the core thesis remained identical. Boundaries are absolutely not impenetrable brick walls. They are simply doors equipped with locks that you exclusively control. Following the ceremony, a terrified 20-year-old girl approached me, her eyes overflowing with tears. That was my exact reality. My parents violently expelled me when I was 16. I genuinely thought I was the only person carrying the shame. "You are incredibly far from being alone," I reassured her, gripping her shoulders. "You are actively surviving. And right now, that is more than enough." She practically tackled me into a desperate hug. "Thank you so much." I drove back to the sanctuary I shared with Eleanor, my actual, authentic mother, and I experienced an emotion I hadn't accessed in decades: absolute, unshakable peace. People constantly ask if I harbored deep regrets about that specific Friday night, the horrific storm, the emotional betrayal, the terrifying hospital stay. The honest answer is no, because that exact sequence of horrors directly drove me to this specific point in time. It led me to this incredibly fulfilling career and to the fiercely loyal family I consciously selected. I am highly aware that not every tragedy wraps up with a neat, happy resolution like mine. I acknowledge my immense privilege. Dr. Eleanor Smith randomly drove down that specific street, actively chose to rescue me, and fundamentally saved my life. Millions of discarded kids do not receive that miracle. But every single human being possesses the inherent right to establish ironclad boundaries. Every single human being possesses the ultimate authority to dictate exactly who gets VIP access to their energy. You absolutely do not owe highly toxic individuals a front row seat to your life. Not even if you share matching DNA. Especially not if you share matching DNA. I learned the hard way that forgiveness and reconciliation are completely separate concepts. You can wholly forgive a monster in order to lower your own blood pressure, while simultaneously ensuring they remain permanently exiled from your universe. Those two actions do not contradict each other. In fact, they are frequently a required pairing for survival. I discovered that shared bloodlines do not equal family. Consistent choices equal family. Unwavering reliability equals family. Showing up when things get ugly equals family. Eleanor physically showed up for me every single day for 13 consecutive years. She thoroughly earned the title of Mom. My biological creators? They showed up exactly one time at the hospital, immediately failed the test, and permanently surrendered. That single data point tells you absolutely everything you need to know. I ultimately learned that true success isn't about dedicating your life to proving your haters wrong. It's about constructing something massively impactful despite their best efforts to crush you. The scholarship initiative was never a revenge plot. It was my designated purpose. It was the deliberate alchemy of converting my personal agony into a shield to protect others. That is the fundamental difference. Revenge is an active desire to inflict pain. Purpose is an active desire to facilitate healing. I learned that your market value is not determined by the cowards who walk away. It is solely determined by how massively you evolve after their departure. Certain demographics will continuously underestimate your potential, outright reject you, and attempt to label you as too damaged, too sick, too loud, or totally inadequate. That is entirely a reflection of their pathetic limitations, not yours. You retain absolute control over the next chapter. You get to dictate the person you metamorphose into. I made the conscious choice to become a highly effective weapon for kids exactly like me. Kids desperately requiring a second chance. Kids who inherently deserve to know they are incredibly worthy of being saved. That is my permanent legacy. Not the broken family that tossed me in the garbage, but the unstoppable family I erected from the scrap metal. So, that is my complete timeline. The horrific hurricane that nearly finalized my existence ultimately served as the exact catalyst for the empire I rule today. I am 28 years old now, the exact same age I was when I opened this video, but internally, I feel decades older, infinitely wiser, and completely whole. My biological parents' contact info is still saved in my cloud storage. I haven't bothered to actively delete them, but my thumb has never hovered over the call button either. They're permanently quarantined in my past, strictly barred from my present, and absolutely banned from my future. Madison shoots me a brief, pathetic message every couple of months. Just randomly thinking of you. Truly hope you are doing okay. I read the text bubbles. I never type a response. Maybe one decade I will. Maybe I will take it to my grave. Either outcome is perfectly fine by me. Dr. Eleanor Smith is simply Mom now. Not Dr. Smith, just Mom. She occupies the primary emergency contact slot on every medical form I sign. She is the first number I dial when the universe hands me a victory. She is the sole individual whose critique I genuinely value. Genetic material didn't grant her that title. Her daily choices did. 13 unbroken years of showing up, fiercely advocating for my potential, and violently loving me during the dark eras when I completely loathed myself. That is the true definition of family. Every single year, when October 15th rolls around, the exact anniversary of that torrential storm, I intentionally pilot my car past my childhood address. I don't do it to self-flagellate, and I absolutely do not do it to wallow in depression. I do it purely for the perspective. I put the car in park across the street, stare at those familiar windows and that heavy front door, and I remind myself that 15-year-old girl survived. She survived being branded a psychological defect. She survived being physically thrown away like trash. She survived being explicitly told she was entirely unlovable. And she didn't just scrape by on survival mode, she went on to completely dominate. If you are currently trapped in the dead center of a violent storm right now, whether it is literal or deeply metaphorical, please absorb this truth. You possess the power to survive it. You possess the power to thrive exponentially once the clouds break. Just because a toxic person officially gave up on your potential does absolutely not mean you are allowed to give up on yourself. Establish your impenetrable boundaries. Actively choose your real family. Construct your ultimate purpose. And never, under any circumstances, allow a small-minded coward to convince you that you are too sick, too shattered, or too much to handle. You are exactly, perfectly enough. Thank you so much for sitting with me and listening. Your life deeply matters. And thank you incredibly for staying locked in with me until the very final second. If this specific journey provided you with any clarity or comfort, please absolutely hit that like button and make sure you subscribe. Your engagement actively pushes these stories into the feeds of people who are desperately praying for a sign today. And if you are hungry for more content exactly like this, check out the description box down below. I have meticulously linked a playlist of similar videos down there. Always remember, you alone dictate your inherent worth. Nobody else holds that pen. Please take incredible care of yourselves out there. I will see you all in the very next story.